Hello, and welcome to this free mini workshop about understanding the three-act structure. So, whether you are a planner, a plantser, or a pantser, understanding the kind of bones of storytelling or the structure of storytelling will help you build stronger and more engaging stories. So let's talk about it. My name is Bekah Brinkmeier, and I am an author coach here at AutoCrit. I am thrilled to have you here as part of our World Storytelling Week celebration. Our goal today is to demystify one of the most common structural frameworks used in fiction. So, what the heck do we actually mean by three-act structure? So, essentially, three-act structure is the classic beginning, middle, and end, but it has some specific narrative milestones that kind of keep our readers turning the pages. To get started, let's look at a more macro view of your manuscript. So, a well paced story typically follows, when using the three-act structure, a 25-50-25 split. So, Act 1 should take up roughly the first 25% of your pages. Act 2 is kind of the meat of your story. It covers the middle 50%-ish. And then Act 3 provides the final 25% payoff. So, a tip for you if you are kind of looking at your manuscript and you've been using three-act structure, if it feels like your story is dragging early on, you're going to want to check to see if Act 1 is spilling past that 25% mark. If it is, you could be over explaining the world before the story actually starts. So you want to pay attention to that. So, what is Act 1? The primary goal of Act 1 is setup. We have to establish the stakes immediately. If the reader doesn't understand exactly what the hero or your protagonist stands to lose, they don't really have any reason to care when that hero eventually fights to save it. You are building kind of an emotional investment here. A tip for establishing your goal of Act 1 is that high stakes don't actually always have to be saving the world. They just have to be deeply important to the protagonist's specific unmet need. So let's get into that. So, our next section in Act 1 is we need to begin with our status quo. This is where we meet our protagonist in their normal life. This is where we establish a baseline for what normal kind of is for this person. We are showing our characters' flaws and their unmet needs. We need to see who they are before the story changes them so we can measure their growth by the end. So, a tip here is to use this section to show your protagonist being really good at something, even if their life is a mess. That way, your reader has a reason to root for them immediately. If you want to go deeper into kind of how we build these characters with these internal needs and external ones, then my previous workshop yesterday about characters will go into greater detail. So next we have our inciting incident. This is often called the call to adventure. And this is the moment something happens that makes it impossible for the protagonist to stay in their comfort zone. So frequently, the protagonist will kind of initially resist this change. It creates an early obstacle or a refusal that highlights the difficulty of the journey ahead. So, my tip for you here is to make this incident as disruptive as possible. Your protagonist should feel like life can never go back to normal after this moment. And Act 1 now concludes with plot point 1. This is a definitive moment of choice where your protagonist has to kind of commit to a new path, right? They are no longer being pushed by circumstances. They are stepping across a threshold into a new world with a clear goal in mind. My tip here is to ensure this is a choice and not an accident. Our hero must kind of step into this story rather than being dragged into it to maintain their agency. There does need to be some choice there. Now, I know that this is hard to imagine if you're not used to thinking like this, so I decided to do an example with something that we should be quite familiar to most people. The classic story of Cinderella. So let's see this in action for Act One. Her status quo is going to be her utter misery, right? You meet Cinderella, she's doing her chores, she has her evil stepmother and her step siblings, and she is just kind of downtrodden. The inciting incident, though, is when the announcement of the royal ball, and that's going to completely disrupt her world. After her stepmother sets some impossible conditions, so we have the refusal, which is where we have right here, we are led into plot point one, which occurs when the fairy godmother appears. And Cinderella moves from simply dreaming about the ball to actually going, crossing from her known world into the unknown. So, this is Act One of Cinderella. Let's move to Act Two. So, as we enter Act Two, we are now focused on the journey. So, we already set it up, we're moving into the actual journey. The goal here is to test your protagonist and force them to undergo internal change. This is the longest section of your book. We often refer to this sometimes as the murky middle. It requires some careful pacing to prevent it from sagging. You're going to want the tension to rise steadily throughout this 50% of the story. So, in the first half of Act Two, your protagonist is usually trying to solve their new problems using their old ways of thinking, right? They haven't fully gotten on board yet. They haven't grown. These attempts usually fail or only provide temporary fixes. They are reacting to the world rather than truly changing it. That's important. Tip here is to use this section to explore the promise of the premise. If you are writing a detective book, this is where the detective should be doing the actual investigating. They are searching for the killer, they're kind of gathering their information. This is your investigative space. Now we are at the midpoint. So, this is where something big happens to raise the stakes. It needs to be significant. It is a kind of a marker of a large shift in your narrative. Your protagonist moves from being reactive to being proactive. So they stop running and they start taking direct action towards their goal. Think of this as a midpoint, as a point of no return for your protagonist. So after this event, they should no longer be trying to avoid the conflict. They should be actively trying to win it or get through it. Which brings us to Act Two, the second half. So, in the second half, your antagonist shows up and is striking back even harder. The conflict is intensifying, and your protagonist's old flaws are systematically being stripped away. Right? They are being forced to shed their old identity to survive the increasing pressure. This is for your tip here. This is often referred to as like the trial by fire. Every victory for the hero or your protagonist in this section should come at a significant cost. Which leads us to our blah, blah, blah. Let me try that again. This leads us to the dark night of the soul, where our protagonist is going to lose something. Maybe it's their mentor, their weapon, maybe it's just their hope. They're experiencing loss of some kind. They hit rock bottom. And then they realize that they cannot win unless they change internally. So, a tip here is that this is to not skip this, because this moment is essential for growth. The hero needs to kind of say goodbye to their old self or their old way of thinking so that they can be almost, I don't know, I hate to use the term reborn, but reborn for the final act. Let's see what Cinderella's doing in Act 2. So in Act 2 of Cinderella, she's enjoying the ball, right? There's the promise of the premise. She gets to go to the royal ball. She gets to dance with the prince. Everything is beautiful. It's glamorous. She cannot believe her luck that she gets to be there. However, in the back of her mind, she's always looking at the clock, right? There is a constant countdown going because she has to leave by midnight. Then we are moving into the midpoint. Cinderella has fallen insta-love with the prince, and we are seeing this shift, right? There's a new connection now. It is no longer simply about, hey, I get to attend this party. And so our stakes are changing at the midpoint. It's moving from escaping my chores and getting to have some like fun and going somewhere to, oh my gosh, I might lose my soulmate. The second half kind of feels like a pressure cooker here. So we're seeing the magic as it dissolves as she flees, right? The clock strikes 12. She is running as fast as she can. She loses her slipper. Which brings us to the dark night of the soul. She returns to the house and is immediately locked in the attic. She has tasted freedom. She got a chance to potentially, meet her soulmate, and now everything is lost. She's locked in an attic. She is in a worse position than when she started. And to top it all off, poor Cinderella now has a broken heart. She is not having a great night. So this is where we're at the end of Act 2 for Cinderella. Which brings us to Act 3. So we're finally here, and now we're at the payoff. And the goal of Act 3 is to prove the protagonist has changed and to provide the audience with emotional catharsis. So the climax is the final test. This is where your hero or your protagonist faces the primary antagonist, or it could be also an internal demon. So critically here, the protagonist needs to win or lose through their own agency, not by luck. So a tip would be to ensure that the hero uses a skill or realization that they gained specifically during the trials of Act 2 to solve this conflict. This is going to show that growth. Once the climax is over, all of this glorious tension that you've been building is going to snap. This is where the thematic truth of the story is revealed. It is the aha moment for your reader where they can kind of see the deeper meaning behind the journey than the, trials that you've put these characters through. Now we conclude here in the new normal, right? Our protagonist is back in a stable world, but they have been fundamentally changed. For Act 3, when we are establishing our new normal, I want you to show, don't tell this change. A protagonist who was once afraid should now be seen standing their ground in some kind of small way, as an example. Now, how did that work out for Cinderella? Let's look. So in our climax, the Grand Duke arrives with the slipper. This kind of, the stepmother tries to, break the shoe and hide Cinderella, but this is that final battle. And Cinderella shows her agency in a twist. This is in many versions of Cinderella. There's many of them, but in one of them, she shows her agency by producing the matching slipper herself. And she isn't just like saved, she is participating in her own rescue. Now, her new normal or new status quo is leaving the house forever. She no longer has to live in a place where she's going to get locked in an attic. Now she gets to be queen. She gets to marry, or the princess. She gets to marry the prince. The internal need of being seen for who she truly is now been met by this payoff. Okay. We have a couple more slides. So our final notes here, if you're feeling stuck and you're trying to wrap your head around the 3-act structure, I want you to use these diagnostic questions. In Act 1, I want you to ask yourself, did my protagonist choose to enter the story, or are they just kind of like floating along? If the answer is yes, they did choose to enter the story, then it sounds like your act 1 is working. You move to act 2. If they are just floating along and just stuff is just happening to them and they have not chosen to be part of it, you're going to want to kind of rework that a little bit. In act 2, I want you to ask, is my midpoint big enough? Does it change the direction of the story, or is it just another scene? This is important. Are we giving our readers something to care about? Or is it just happening to them and there's no fight there? Act 3 is, did my protagonist solve the problem using something they learned in Act 2? Did something happen here in Act 2 that changed the outcome of Act 3? So ask yourself these questions and use that as a kind of way to rework any stuck points that you have in your current manuscript if you are using 3-act structure. Okay, I know this was a lot, but it is kind of a quick and messy mini workshop. So with that, I want you to go forth and build your world. Structure is the foundation that kind of allows your brilliance, your creativity, and your ideas to shine. So go forth and build it. 3-act structure is obviously not the only structure for a story, but if you are using this, I hope it was helpful. If this was useful, please do hit the subscribe button. I tend to do these little mini workshops semi regularly, and then share this with a writer who needs it today because it is World Storytelling Week and stories deserve to be told well. I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to check the playlist. We talk about why humans need stories. We talk about where great ideas come from. We talk about building great characters, and we also have multiple writing sprints that you can join in and get some words in today. Don't forget to join in the festivities for World Storytelling Day tomorrow. We are going to have a mix of live YouTube workshops, writing sprints, and a big schedule of events for Friday, March 20th. You can sign up to be notified of the events here or in the link in the caption. All events are free and open to all. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining me this morning. I again hope this was helpful. If you have more questions or you're curious about learning more craft, you can always go to www.autocrit.com/courses. With that, my name is Bekah Brinkmeier, and this has been a free mini workshop in honor of World Storytelling Week. I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.